For 70 years, a secret brotherhood ruled South Africa from the shadows, and most people never knew it existed. They didn't wear uniforms, they didn't need guns, yet their influence shaped nearly every law, policy, and leader in South Africa, from the rise of apartheid to the fall of democracy itself. Inside dimly lit rooms, men stood before a blood-smeared corpse pledging undying loyalty. They took oaths, swore secrecy, and learned a chilling truth. He who betrays the bond will be destroyed by the bond. These weren't soldiers or spies. They were judges, teachers, pastors, even prime ministers. And while the world watched the surface, they pulled the strings from within. Who were they? How did they gain this power? And why did no one stop them? To understand how this secret society seized control of an entire nation, we have to go back to 1918, just after World War I. South Africa was fractured. Afrikaners, the descendants of Dutch settlers, had just lost a bitter war against the British Empire. Their farms were burned, their people scattered, their language and culture pushed to the margins. It was in this moment of humiliation and vulnerability that a small group of Afrikaner intellectuals and ministers founded a society behind closed church doors in Johannesburg. It would be called the Afrikaner Broederbond, the Brotherhood of Afrikaners. At first glance, it looked like a cultural club, a place for white Protestant Afrikaner men to preserve their identity. But beneath the surface, it was something far more dangerous, a blueprint for domination. The Broederbond's mission was to quietly reclaim South Africa for the Afrikaner people, not through open revolution, but by infiltrating every structure of power: schools, courts, churches, businesses, newspapers, and eventually, the government itself. It would take decades. Patience was part of the plan. By the time the world took notice, it was already too late. Apartheid was law. The country's most powerful positions were occupied by men bound to the bond, by blood oaths, death rituals, and an unshakable belief that they were chosen to rule. And yet, for much of its existence, the Broederbond didn't officially exist. No public records, no membership lists, only whispers, and consequences for those who asked too many questions. In the cold aftermath of the South African War, Afrikaners had lost more than territory. They had lost identity. Their farms were scorched by British forces. Tens of thousands died in concentration camps. Their language, Afrikaans, was ridiculed, their religion marginalized. And by 1910, British elites dominated politics, education, and commerce. In this climate of defeat, 4 Afrikaner men met in secret in 1918. Their idea, a society that would rebuild Afrikaner power from the inside out. They called it the Afrikaner Broederbond. But this wasn't a political party. It wasn't even public. The Broederbond would operate like a ghost, influencing the system without ever appearing within it. The mission was simple: secure Afrikaner dominance in all areas of South African life. Membership was invitation only. Applicants were studied for years. Only Afrikaans-speaking, Protestant white men over 25 were eligible. Loyalty came before everything: family, faith, even government. Once selected, members were initiated through a ceremony that bordered on the occult. The initiation wasn't symbolic. It was psychological warfare. New members entered a dimly lit room. At the center lay a bier covered in a black cloth. A fake corpse rested atop it, a dagger buried deep in its chest. The Afrikaans word verraad, meaning betrayal, was scrawled in blood-red letters. A pastor dressed in clerical robes would read aloud, "He who betrays the bond will be destroyed by the bond. The bond never forgets." Then came the oath, one that pledged secrecy until death. Members were taught secret hand clasps, phrases, and gestures to identify one another anywhere, in a boardroom, a courtroom, or even parliament. This wasn't symbolism, it was structured. Every handshake could unlock access. Every nod could signal power. And in a divided nation, the Broederbond's unity became its ultimate weapon. By 1944, the bond had only 2,672 members. but each was a needle inserted into the arteries of South African power. In 1948, after decades of quiet influence, the Broederbond made its most daring move. It backed the National Party, a political force dedicated to formalizing racial segregation. When the party won the election that year, apartheid became the law of the land. But behind the scenes, the Broederbond was pulling every string. Key figures in the National Party, including prime ministers like Daniel Malan and Hendrik Verwoerd, were Broederbond members. Policy decisions, speeches, and even cabinet appointments were often pre-approved by the Bond's inner circle. According to government insiders, no major decision in mid-20th century South Africa was made without consulting the Broederbond. President P.W. Botha, for instance, held membership number 4,487. Thousands of other government officials, from city mayors to Supreme Court judges, were secretly operating under the same oath. Even schools were not safe. University chancellors and education ministers quietly rewrote textbooks under the Bond's direction, embedding Afrikaner nationalist ideology into the minds of millions of students. What the public saw was a functioning democracy. What they didn't see was that democracy's blueprint and its boundaries were written by the Brotherhood. The brilliance of the Broederbond wasn't just in its secrecy, it was in its design. It operated in over 800 cells across South Africa. Each cell knew only its local objectives. Members rarely knew who else was involved, keeping the leadership structure protected and untraceable. And it wasn't limited to politics. The Bond extended into banking, corporate boardrooms, the military, the police force, and especially the Dutch Reformed Church, South Africa's dominant Protestant institution. A 1964 government commission reluctantly admitted, hardly any sphere of public life escapes the influence of the Broederbond. This web of influence allowed the apartheid system to run efficiently and brutally, while shielding the men truly responsible from the spotlight. Outsiders who suspected the Bond's existence were often ignored or silenced. Journalists who asked too many questions were labeled as traitors or communists. A few disappeared entirely. It was a system designed to never be exposed, a regime controlled not by laws or elections, but by handshakes and loyalty oaths. By the late 1980s, apartheid was under global pressure, economic sanctions, international outrage, growing internal resistance, and then a twist no one saw coming. F.W. de Klerk, the last apartheid-era president and a lifelong Broederbond member, began dismantling the very system the Bond had helped create. He released Nelson Mandela. He legalized banned parties. He prepared the country for democratic elections. Was this a betrayal? Or had the Broederbond calculated the shift for survival? Some insiders claim the organization knew the old system was unsustainable and pivoted to maintain influence in the new one. Others argue de Klerk defied the Bond, breaking its sacred oath in the name of progress. Either way, by 1994, the Bond was no longer the invisible empire it once was. It rebranded as the Afrikaner Bond, a transparent, non-secretive organization open to all races and genders. The death oaths, black-cloaked ceremonies, and secret handclasps were quietly buried, but the legacy remained. Thousands of former members still held wealth, land, and powerful positions in post-apartheid South Africa. The structures they built and the divisions they cemented didn't disappear with a name change. When apartheid collapsed and the Broederbond rebranded itself as a transparent organization, many assumed the story had ended. But for some, the transformation felt less like an apology and more like a calculated retreat. The organization's new name, the Afrikaner Bond, came with public membership lists, a website, and mission statements about democracy and diversity. But here's the twist. None of its former members were ever held accountable. No trials, no confessions, no deep investigations into how this secret brotherhood had infiltrated an entire government, manipulated elections, and authored laws that devastated millions. Even more disturbing, Many ex-members quietly retained power in business, academia, and media, adapting to the new South Africa while keeping their networks intact. They didn't vanish, they evolved. And here's the final question, one South Africans still wrestle with today. If a secret brotherhood could manipulate a modern state so thoroughly, in plain sight, what other powers in history have done the same? The Broederbond didn't need guns to control a nation, just blood oaths, patience, and absolute loyalty. And while its name has changed and its secrets are now part of the public record, some believe the real legacy of the bond still lingers, not in documents but in systems, minds, and quiet handshakes that never really ended. Because the most successful secret societies don't disappear, they just stop being called secret. The story of the Afrikaner Broederbond is not just about South Africa, it's a warning. A warning about what can happen when power hides behind rituals, when loyalty overrides law, and when a nation's future is shaped by those who were never elected to lead it. For over 70 years, the Broederbond operated in silence, steering a country toward division, fear, and oppression, all while convincing the public that democracy was in control. Even now, its full influence has never been fully documented. How many decisions were made in secret rooms? How many lives were shaped by men whose names we'll never know? And more importantly, could something like this be happening elsewhere, right now? We want to hear what you think. Do secret societies still influence global politics today? Have we simply traded old rituals for new ones? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If this story gripped you and you want more untold history, conspiracies, and shadow networks uncovered, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. We dive deep into the mysteries most people never get to hear, because history isn't always written by the winners. Sometimes it's written by the hidden.